Good morning, welcome. If you're across the country, good afternoon. For those who are in Eastern time zones, welcome to the Climate Connections event on AgTech. I'm really excited about today's talk because I like eating. And it's going to be so important that we can continue to feed me as we go forward into the future, as life becomes more uncertain. And we need to do that in a sustainable way. And there's a lot of opportunity, I think, around that. So I'm really excited about some of the folks who know the ag space more specifically and better than I am and do to share with you some of the challenges today. Next slide, please, Lee. What we're going to do is I will take up a few minutes of your time explaining how things go. I will introduce some of our partners in this particular event in this series. Then we'll move on to talking to some of those industry experts that I've teased you with so delicately, though you should know who they are because it is on all of the advertising for the event. Then at the end of it, in an hour's time, after you've heard them talk a little bit about some of the opportunities and challenges they see in the space that they would love to see addressed, you'll actually get a chance to talk to them. So we're going to have breakout rooms at the end, and there you will get to chat with them. You'll get to select who it is you go and speak with. Share a little bit about your story, what your interest is in the space. I think there's a fantastic opportunity for them to learn about you, learn about some of the technologies, solutions, and research being done, as well as obviously dive deeper into the challenges and opportunities that they've come here today to share with you. And then I'll be back in 90 short minutes to say goodbye and talk a little bit about our next session as well, should you be interested. Next slide, please. I can't get away from holding the mic without talking a little bit about Foresight. We are Canada's clean tech accelerator. We are across the country. We work with SMEs to help them develop their technology into commercializable solutions. We work with industry to pave the way for greater innovation. We work with government and of course academia as well to bring about more impactful clean tech ecosystems across the country. So we have a way to get involved. That is our community of innovators. We would love it for you to sign up, learn about some of the events, learn about some of the programs we have running, recommend them to people that you think would be applicable, be they innovators and looking to take our accelerator programming, be they interested researchers that want to take part in our climate connections, be they people interested in our challenges. We have lots going on. And if you weren't paying attention, yesterday we announced our Foresight 50 for the 50 most investable clean tech companies across Canada. So we are keeping our finger on the pulse of what's going on, trying to communicate that as clearly as we can across the clean tech industry. Next slide, please. And we do have cohort applications open right now. So kicking off in January for our winter cohorts, we will have iterations of our Kickstart. That is for our ideation stage companies. So if you have a technology and you're wondering how you can go about commercializing it, that will help you develop the skills to explore the markets, to find that beachhead that you need. Right? What is the lowest hanging fruit? I think I can get away with some fruit analogies here. You don't want to climb to the top of the tree and pick the hardest apple to get to. You want to start at the bottom of the tree. And that's really what the Kickstart program will look at, is where is the biggest pain? What is the greatest opportunity for the technology you have? We will also have a cohort of our launch program, which if you identified that beachhead market, will help you work out what is the rest of the business model that will make that into a viable, profitable business. At Foresight, we really believe that the businesses that can generate profit are the ones that will be able to reinvest and scale their solutions to address the global problems we face. Thank you very much, Lee. If you move to the next slide here, I'll talk a little bit. Should I turn it over to Andrea? Do you want to talk about agriNEXT?
Happily. So agriNEXT is Foresight's Ag Sector Acceleration and Network Hub. We're taking a collaborative approach, bringing together all the Helix 5 stakeholder groups towards accelerating solutions that are addressing the environmental and economic pain points, competitiveness pain points of our agri-food sector. And so the goal here is to have our initial or inaugural cohort of agriNEXT acceleration beginning in the new year in April.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And this will be the first time, not the first time, but you will see that Innovation UBC logo. Our wonderful partners who've helped start this initiative to bring together industry and innovative researchers. And so I'll ask Shannon Barr to talk a little bit about our partnership and especially what goes on at UBC.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Stephen. So my name is Shannon Barr, and I lead the Climate Venture Studio at Entrepreneurship at UBC, which is in the Innovation UBC portfolio. And when Stephen and I came up with this series of events, the idea was to provide a venue, as Stephen has said, for customer discovery. So an opportunity for researchers and early stage deep science, clean tech companies to be able to ask questions of industry experts that know what the major problems are in their industry, so that you have an opportunity to tweak and pivot at an earlier stage than doing a lot of work and then having some disappointment a little bit later when you find out actually your technology doesn't solve some of the most urgent problems that industry has. So I really encourage you to take advantage of this situation to ask customer discovery pointed questions to really understand what the major problems are and whether you can contribute to making a big impact to solve them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shannon. And next slide, Lee. Well, the seed of this idea did start on the West Coast here with UBC. Agriculture knows no boundaries, knows no provincial boundaries. Opportunity and industry knows no boundaries. And we are so very happy to be presenting this in partnership with Innovation Guelph and have a number of speakers from Ontario as well here today. So with that, I'll introduce Chris Conway to talk a little bit about their organization.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's fantastic to be with all of you this morning. Innovation Guelph is one of 17 regional innovation centers in the province of Ontario. We have a number of programs which appeal to businesses at various stages. We have a startup program which is Ontario-based, and really it's for businesses that are past the idea stage, and pre-revenue to $1 million in annual revenue would qualify. We have a fast lane program. It's Ontario-based as well. Conversely, it's for businesses with over 1 million in annual revenue. Then we have women's-led programming. We have Rise Up, which is a national women's program. Over $200,000 in annual revenue is a requirement. Of course, companies can be located anywhere in Canada. Then Rise Ventures is our more local Southern Ontario-based women's program. It's cohort-based and doesn't have a revenue requirement. The program that I'm involved in as program manager is the CFE iHub. It's an Ontario-based accelerator for circular economy-focused entrepreneurs. We work very closely with the City of Guelph and County of Wellington on the Our Food Future and COIL programs. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this panel. I know there's all kinds of collaborations that have occurred between panel members and some organizations that we're familiar with in Guelph, and it's quite encouraging to see this cross-national collaboration going on. With that being said, I'm pleased to introduce the panel to everyone. We have Ian Affleck with us today. He works with domestic and international agricultural stakeholders and governments on the development of policies, regulations, and science related to plant biotechnology. Prior to joining CropLife Canada, he worked at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for 10 years. His work there focused on the regulation of novel plants and new varieties. Ian holds a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the Nova Scotia Agricultural College, concentrating on agronomy and pest management. He also holds a master's degree in agriculture from the University of Guelph, specializing in horticulture and plant breeding. He's been involved in agriculture from an early age, having grown up on a potato farm in Bedwick, Prince Edward Island. So great to see that Guelph connection. Chris Bush is the second panelist. He's a sustainable agriculture pioneer. He was responsible for taking the first biogas plant for agriculture in British Columbia, Canada, from concept to full operations in 2010. It was the first in North America to deliver biomethane to a utility grid from a farm. In 2015, he installed the first full nutrient recovery system for a Canadian on a farm digester at Seabreeze Farm, which opened the door for co-products. Chris is a director of the Point 3 Biotech Ag Tech Consortium, operating at the Eco Dairy in Abbotsford. The group has launched the Living Lab component of the Symbiosis Center, which is an on-farm biorefinery and applied research facility, developing a manure management as a service program. All of this is in support of the Canadian movement to the circular bioeconomy. And the Catalyst Agri-Innovations Society, which is a group established in 2009 to advance the future of food system solutions, funded by energy revenues. 10 years of his life have been contributed to the TEDx talk, Poop Soup and the Inevitable Global Movement. And the third panelist that we have with us today is Don McCabe. Don is a no-till corn, soybean, and wheat farmer. He serves as a director representing the counties of Lambton and Middlesex. Don served as president of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture for 2 years following his election at the 2014 general meeting. Prior to serving as president, he held the position of vice president from 2008 to 2014. With a doctorate level education in soil genesis and classification from University of Guelph, another great connection to see there to Guelph, and a chemistry degree from the University of Western Ontario, Don is a leading advocate for environmental farm stewardship in the areas of air, water, biodiversity, and climate change. He sits on the Thames, Synthem, and Area Source Water Protection Committee, is also vice chair of the BioIndustrial Innovation Center, and is proud to serve as the fire chief to the Inwood Fire Department. So each of the panelists will be presenting a problem, and then we'll get into some Q&A and details regarding those problems. So Chris Bush, could you please start us off?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So, and I think there's going to be a bit of consensus across the board of some of these missing links that we've noticed we're in the same place. Specifically, the aspect that we're pursuing is informatics, because there's all this pressure around climate change. Agriculture is being called out for many things, but we don't have very effective mechanisms for measuring these things. And you can't manage what you don't measure, and you can't intervene with what you don't know is coming. And you know, very briefly, work that we're doing right now mentioned at the Eco Dairy, we've got about $5 million worth of equipment. We're specifically developing system solutions. And if this works, I can share the screen very quickly. We did talk about this, so hopefully this works. You seeing that okay? We're running a program called BioDigital Convergence for manure management as a service. Is one of the challenges. There's a tremendous amount of distrust and concern in the farming community around being exposed through data. So we're building programs that we are able to gather the information, but anonymize it and deal with it. But we're addressing a problem that the farms are facing, something that they want to see solved. Manure management is a challenge, and we find ways to make that extended producer responsibility revenue generating. So the challenge is that we're dealing with the exponential complexities of nature and market. There's a deafening amount of information noise in the world, and people don't know what truth is anymore. And we have to find ways that we can cut through that with things that are meaningful. So this icon on a blank piece of paper isn't very helpful, but if we can show where that it relates to all of these other things, we can start to move forward. And you know, exponential acceleration in technologies for farms. We're seeing all of these tools come available, but how do we connect those? How do we make those technology solutions effective in the hands of the people that need them, and find ways to monetize them? Certainly agriculture presents opportunities for much more than a simple circular economy. There's opportunities all over the place that we can make a difference. And one tool that's in our, actually, sorry, I forgot about this one. On-farm biogas with nutrient recovery has the opportunity to impact at least 12 of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But again, there aren't good mechanisms that will let us take these values and put them into programs where they can be properly counted, monetized. And on the gas side, our primary revenue generation is renewable natural gas. In that, carbon intensity really matters. And a bad farm project making biogas is 20 times better at decarbonizing than even food waste. Everything else is still carbon intensive. We get paid based on carbon intensity. There's all these externalities that are not yet included, and there's new management tools that can support true cost accounting. And one program that's available right now, Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. Any students that are enrolled in the 4 universities of the program, they can apply up until January of 2022. There's $12,000 in funding available for those students. We have bench space at our lab in Abbotsford. We have a tremendous number of opportunities that we would be very pleased to support students working around these resources. And that's my framing of the challenges.
Thank you, Chris. Ian Affleck, could you please present your problem next?
Great. So I think I'm building on what Chris has put forward as he talks about informatics. I'll dive into one specific area of data collection that I think is going to be critical for agriculture moving forward, and that's water. So in agriculture, whether it be solution providers or innovators that are inventing new techniques or ideas to be used on the farm, the key element for any decision being made is the data. Is it having the impact that I'm looking for it to have? So understanding the impact of agricultural practices on nearby waterways is going to be very, very important in terms of helping the farmer understand what the right decision is to support sustainable agriculture on their farm. And sustainable agriculture has a number of different elements. It's environmentally sustainable, it's economically sustainable, and it applies to food safety across the board. So a couple of reasons why this is an important topic in Canada. Our government is founding a national water agency coming forward in the next year or so. And that's going to come with some directed research. Now that water agency is going to cover a number of things: clean drinking water for the north, general water health when you look at the Great Lakes, things of that nature. But it's fine if you can measure the water quality of a large body of water. But what's really important is understanding what's happening very near the farms where these decisions are getting made. So as we look at water monitoring and how it's going to feed into the gaps that we have in water monitoring in this country, we'll be looking for more reliable, more robust, more standardized, easier to share results from water monitoring so that we can compare the water monitoring we're doing in Saskatchewan to PEI, one farming practice to another versus the soil type. So if I can give an example of I'm not an expert in water monitoring, I just know it's an area of importance. But I grew up in Prince Edward Island on a potato farm. In the spring, our rivers are about an inch deep. In the spring and the fall, it could be 2 feet deep. In a torrential rain, it might be 4 feet deep. So figuring out a water monitoring system that isn't washed away in the torrential rain, but is still pulling samples during the dry season, so you understand what's happening on your land all the way through, is very critical. And finally, there's a couple of ways that data is going to roll in together. One, if it can be provided to the farmer, it helps them have insight as they are the experts on what's happening on their land. It also helps our regulatory agencies and our innovators know that, okay, is this new product that we're trying to bring to market, is it having the impact we intended it to have once released? So it's not just about approving new products, it's about following them once they're put out there and making sure that they're behaving as was expected. And that goes across the board, from new mechanization that you might apply to a farm, a new farming practice of the way you till your land, or if you put in a buffer zone, is it having the impact on keeping nutrients in the ground instead of in the stream? If you're bringing forward new biopesticide controls or organic pesticides or synthetic pesticides, are they functioning as we intended them to function? So all this comes back to being able to measure the quality of the water throughout the season and plug those data gaps that we have across the country, and then hopefully feed into what Chris had presented before, which is the bioinformatics that can weigh all of these different impacts of these different decisions to actually take a systems-based approach to agriculture that focuses on the outcomes that we're looking for, versus applying an ideology to agriculture that is devoid of the data that is required to determine if that ideology is actually having the impact that we're expecting. So overall, credible, reliable water monitoring that speaks to itself across the country, that is affordable, because right now it's not cheap to be doing constant water monitoring in water bodies, especially local creeks and rivers across the country. So there's a water monitoring challenge to put on the table.
Thanks, Ian. Don McCabe, could you please present your problem next?
Thank you, Christopher, and thanks to all the organizers here for the opportunity to participate. So I would like to very much acknowledge that the bio that Christopher read off was accurate, probably about 20 years ago. But seriously, it is very dated. And so let me clear the air with where I'm coming from. First of all, I've defined myself as a grumpy old white guy. And that means that I'm here to tell you that I'm not have any interest in anything that you're frickin' doing unless you're going to come solve a problem. And my problem is Mother Nature wins. Mother Nature wins at all turns, all costs, all times of the year, all times of the day. And all I want right now is 1 bushel more because that's what I get paid on. And the only thing I get paid on. And until my economics is good, I'm not going to be looking at social issues. I'm not going to be looking at environmental issues. And I farm in southwestern Ontario, and I'm supposedly an algae problem. I got news for you. I want to put nitrogen on my farm and have it used there. I'm not buying it to feed cattails or pickerel. So let's be very stringent on what we're doing. And please don't come to me with big data solutions and then have me sign a technical agreement that I'm not going to read because your lawyer made it 28 pages long and I don't get it. So the reality is I don't trust big data agreements. And if you say trust me in the opening conversation, I do have a dog and he can run faster than I can, but I can do other things that will go off faster than the dog can. So the reality is, guys and gals out there, really it's necessary to have an in-depth conversation about what your problem is, because we've got great minds here that need to be harnessed. And I'm very concerned on the issue of climate change and where we're going to go. And I'm currently right now wanting to finish harvest 21, which will be maybe turning into harvest 22 before I'm done, because I don't have frost in the ground right now to complete a corn harvest. So the reality is, I look at farmers, and I don't care, the world over, are all the same people. From a gentleman I met from Thailand when I was doing the UN COP circuit for a while. That's the United Nations Conference of the Parties. Glasgow 26 just wrapped up. But he was so proud to be able to farm 1/6 of an acre that he had just received from his father, because that was tradition in Thailand, to a guy I know in Saskatchewan who's running 150,000 acres. And that's that we all share the same definition. We're a manager of the carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus cycles to produce starch, oil, fuel, fiber, energy, and protein while preserving animal habitat, improving air quality, improving soil quality, improving water quality. I just want to be paid for something. So please bring me stuff that I can cooperatively use with you. Do not claim my data. It was mine, I created it, and you're only borrowing it. So please acknowledge the returns on that. Thank you, and you'll hear more rants later.
Thank you very much, Dawn. We're going to move into individual questions, and then we'll have space for group questions as well. Starting with Chris, I'm just wondering, taking a systems view, how often would you say the frequency of this problem comes about when you're interacting with similar organizations in the space?
Yeah, again, like I said, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And there's so many different tools. Our work right now is we've picked, I think there's 8 different companies that are part of this. We're putting that in a single timeline stack, because that gives us somewhere to start. But everybody's in the same boat, right? And I mentioned the information noise. You watch something like a Cowspiracy or Planet of the Humans, or some of these different things that are out there, all this spectacular information, but it's all very managed. At the end of the day, we've got to eat, right? And we need to know. So sorry, to answer your question, how often come up? Every day, all the time.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Now for Ian, I'm wondering, what do you think is wrong with some of the current solutions in terms of trying to, pull all this data and get it together?
I think, so the bioinformatics part's a bit beyond my realm of expertise, but I think the demand and the need for the information is definitely there. Where I work here in Ottawa, I work a lot with regulatory agencies who are trying to make decisions about what products should and shouldn't be allowed to be on the market. And they are looking for reliable data sets in order to help them make those decisions. So that's really at the core of having access to new agricultural technologies, so that folks like Dawn can get that extra bushel. And what's dangerous is when a regulatory decision has to be made because of the absence of data, not because there's harm being seen, but because we just They want more data to ensure its safety. And if we can't provide that data, a technology might be gone that was very beneficial. And it's not because it was harmful, it's because we couldn't prove that it wasn't. Again, proving a negative is not where you want to go in science, but water monitoring is something we can do. And that's something that we're heading toward. And as I think, as we know, the importance of water moving forward is only going to increase. So understanding how we're managing the quality of that water will play into many more decisions than the ones that I get involved in here in Ottawa. But I see the direct results of that, of where farmers can lose access to crop management tools just because we don't have all the gaps filled in the data. And you don't want to be running around trying to get the data at the moment where you're going to lose the product. You'd like to be there before that.
Great, thank you, Ian. And Dawn, I'm wondering, you articulated some significant challenges. Are you aware of others who are looking into solving the same problems that you articulated? If so, what about their approach do you feel could be improved?
Well, I'm going to pick an example to answer your question, Chris, and then if I don't hit the mark, come back at me. The reality of the whole world of carbon credits and the world coming from Glasgow right now, and this is a very nascent development and all the rest of it, but we're seeing the reality of different markets occurring in the reality of carbon credits. So there's a compliance market, which it means it's a regulatory bit, and regulations you're very adherent to. You need to meet these requirements. And I put in a proviso on that. My former MP, who I definitely enjoyed working with, told me that Ottawa was 20 square kilometers surrounded by reality. So that's where the regulations are made. So yes, that's tongue in cheek, but bottom line, when regulations are made, it's very difficult to change them. When there's now voluntary markets, and that's the reality of somebody wanting to pay you for voluntarily doing something. I don't voluntarily do anything in agriculture. I have to think it through because I have to be a system thinker. And what is going to do today is going to impact me tomorrow. Or what if I don't do it today? How's that going to bite me tomorrow? So on and so forth. Then there's insetting, and this is the world of corporates now choosing to sell me their technology, and they want me to use that technology, but because I used it, they are going to take credit for what I did with it. And that's bull, in my opinion. Very straightforward, simple. If I did it on my land, then it should be more my share of the coin. And if you're bringing a technology that's going to supposedly solve something, remember, if I'm using big machinery, as in stuff that would come from AGCO, John Deere, or Case New Holland, I am probably married to that machinery, and I'm going to be looking for how does your technology go through their technology, because I don't have time to worry about whether I need a semicolon where the colon was. So the end of the day here, in the world of the carbon credit world, what you're really looking at is how are we going to reduce the energy use in agriculture and improve the food return, because that's the long haul here. 2050, I expect 9 billion for supper, and if they're all my relatives, they've got to have the paper plates because they're not going to wash anything, and there cannot be any food scraps, but they're hard eaters, so they will eat it all anyways. But I got to produce it in the first place. So bottom line, we got a lot of work to do. We can do it together, but the biggest issue, bar none across the board, I want to share a quote with you that I don't know where the source of it is. It's a George fellow that said this. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has actually taken place. Remember, I deal in handshakes, and I dealt in handshakes before COVID. I'm getting comfortable enough now to do them again, and that's what the world is.
Thank you, Dawn. Very interesting how you touched on regulations, and I was thinking we could open up to the wider panel a question in that respect. I'm wondering what the role, in your opinion, of regulators in either creating new markets or inadvertently creating new barriers to adoption would be. Yes, Don?
Thank you, Christopher. I'll barge into this one and I'll give you a very current example. Right now in Ottawa, Environment Canada is setting the regulations and the outlooks for what what climate change is going to look like. And they're going to be the platform strutters and the conference organizers and the conference attenders. The other arm that's actually operationalizing climate change for Canada, in my opinion, is Natural Resources Canada. They're going to be the ones that are on the road making things happen. Agriculture Canada, in my opinion, is not engaged as effectively as those other two ministries are. Need to see the mandate letters for the ministers coming up here to confirm my suspicions. But right now, NRCan is looking to invoke a clean fuel standard so that we can get around. And that clean fuel standard is going to have some regulatory force in it, and it wants to incent markets. Now, don't get me wrong, policy makes markets. I live in markets, but the only market that really gets my attention is the Chicago Board of Trade, because no matter what, in Canada, I don't care if you're growing canola or durum, where I'm doing my corn and soybeans here, everything eventually flows through Chicago Board of Trade. And the clean fuel standard, now with its regulatory stuff, is that going to adhere to address a global issue, because it's a global airshed. We got to reduce that carbon in, and you cannot set regulations and not expect technology and approaches to change over time. I've changed my mode of operation a number of times through the years because technology's gotten bigger and better and made me able to do more in a day. I need to do that because of the climate conditions and all the rest. And that's where I remember I've only got one boss, and that's Mother Nature. I will ignore regulation because they can't be, if I have to, in order to get a crop off. And I do not want to hurt my soil health by compacting or cutting ruts. And that's why I'm sitting here today, as opposed to ripping up a cornfield to get the corn off it right now to make a clean fuel like ethanol, or at the same time feed you in the grocery store. Bottom line, no argument for me on whether there's food versus fuel. There is no debate. There's only academics looking for an opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Ian, do you have, Chris, do you have any comments? No?
I think, Chris, your comment was on like what could be limiting innovation. Was that the, just remind me of the context again?
Yeah, so you see regulations either maybe creating new markets or maybe, creating barriers?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Don that regulations can create new markets, sometimes because they created a barrier, because of the inability to provide something. It creates a market for something to fill that hole. But I also think I was at a talk not long ago with Matt Ridley, an author from the UK, and someone asked, what's the biggest inhibitor of innovation moving forward? And he, in a snap, said public policy. He's like, the speed at which public policy moves is too slow. It's not keeping up with innovation, and it's what's going to hold things back. One thing I work in very deeply is gene editing. That's a major opportunity for plant agriculture. And we're struggling globally to revise our regulatory structures to embrace that. So I think public policy is something that can slow things down. But I think what often results in it slowing it down is not recognizing that it's an important part of your pathway to market. Is, you can have a brilliant idea and work on it very hard, but if you're not checking that there's a regulatory hurdle down the road and you're not addressing that early enough, it could really stifle your ability to go to market. So yes, work on the brilliant idea, but if it's something that is going to, hey, this sounds like something that falls in Environment Canada, I should find out if there's regulations that apply to this. And then I should start talking with Environment Canada a few years before I need to market it, to make sure that you don't find out the year you need to go to market that you actually have 3 years of regulatory approvals in front of you. And maybe you wouldn't need those 3 years if you had spent time with the regulator in advance explaining why their antiquated approach to managing things that look like this don't actually apply to this, because the regulator can only apply the systems they've already built. And they're kind of going, okay, your thing, it fits in here. This is the closest thing I can fit it in. Well, this isn't built for this. We actually needed to build this, and then you could have moved through much faster. So regulations aren't necessarily exciting. They're not always fun. I've made a career in it, so I find it fun. But I think innovators do need to think about creating those connections around regulatory requirements. And I don't know, like whether it's Foresight Canada or there's other accelerator groups, when you get right into a specific technology that often can connect you with regulatory experts or folks who've had experience in the regulatory space. And I would say, keep those antennas up and look to be aware of what regulatory requirements might come in front of you. And often people think I speak of regulation as I'm always talking in the negative, and it's always cutting red tape and doing this. And I like to say, it's about enabling regulatory frameworks. It's about frameworks that enable innovation. Sometimes that means an approval and an assessment. Sometimes it means voluntary guidelines. It's a regulatory framework doesn't always mean 4 years with the government. It means a suite of things that ensure safety and efficacy. So it's try to look at them as a positive thing, and it can be a stamp of confidence in your technology as well. That's the best I can do to promote regulation, given what I do for a living.
I'd say that we've been ahead of regulation all the way through, and it actually hurt us trying to be a little preemptive. 2008, we got our start with biogas. The province of BC was supposed to bring in new manure regulations in 2009. The old ones had all sorts of really barriers to innovation. The new regulations were not actually brought out until 2019. And for a decade, we languished, right? That no one wanted to get involved because they would be so exposed. The new regulations finally open it up that there's a level playing field for exposure for everyone, which has motivated people. I'm thankful we were right, but that decade of waiting for policy to catch up was brutal.
I would like to add to Christopher's comments there, because bottom line, I'm in the province of Ontario, and we're living through a period of stalled opportunity right now, because the Ford Conservative government came into power after a number of years of liberal rule, and they wanted to show their impact. And being conservative, they had to cut a bunch of stuff, and they have. And therefore, the bioeconomy is languishing in Ontario right now. We have a climate change plan, not a climate change plan in Ontario. Nothing's really been done. We're going to have an election here on June 2nd of this year. We'll see where the world goes after that. But the reality is, politics can change your world overnight, and you need to stay engaged with what's happening and where the world is going. And I think they're still unpacking the realities of what Trump may have signed into supposed law while he was in the White House. And again, I raised the US because as a Canadian farmer, I am watching what the US does, because that has tremendous impact, considering there is nothing that I use on my farm in the big horsepower category of a tractor or a combine that is built in Canada. So the realities of what they're doing down there impacts me here too. And I'll be watching that. I recommend highly you watch it too, please.
Thank you, everyone. So I know we had a lot in common in terms of various regulatory issues. I'm wondering more specifically, though, if you see any commonalities with the problems that have been articulated here, and also if you see your problem being solved in other industries.
One of the challenges for me is I don't know enough about water monitoring. I just know that we don't know enough about water monitoring. So I definitely see the gap. I'm not an expert in that space. I would imagine that if you were to look at activities, whether it be in the oil and gas space, which has impact on waterways, whether it be forestry or mining, like I'm sure that they've all had to create robust data sets as to their impact on the nature around them. I think the difference being is that when you look at Canadian agriculture, it's 100 million acres of agricultural production and all the waterways that it is near. Whereas if you're mining in oil and gas, it's like, you know exactly that's the waterway right there. I just got to look at the mouth of the plant and deal with that. Agriculture is so diverse, and the approaches to agriculture by different farmers are so diverse that it creates a different challenge for agriculture to get consistent data. So I'm sure there's things we could learn from other sectors who have had to build information
if you bring
around their water sets.
tonight
So I'll weigh in again here, and that's the reality that my farm is located roughly about a half hour from the quote unquote chemical valley of Sarnia, Ontario. It is not a valley, it's all flat clay land there. It just happens to be the area where a lot of industrial activity occurred, because Oil Springs, Ontario was the original oil well. And the reason that I'm pulling up Sarnia, Ontario, it's right at the base of, if you're looking at a map, Lake Huron drains into the St. Clair River. Right where that St. Clair River starts is where Sarnia, Ontario is. So there's constantly issues about what is big industry doing to that water or whatever else. And the issue of Lake Erie, well, I've got water that eventually is going to be flowing through Lake Erie too. And I've got an algae problem that I've supposedly got to solve. Well, there's a big difference between what's going on in the Chemical Valley and what's going on with me. The reality is, yes, those refineries are there, but those are global corporations. They can choose to move the location of those factories and shut them down and move them. Where I farm, I don't pick up roots and move my farm from this place to that place to get a better climate. I'm where I am, and that's all there is to it. Now, on the issue of borrowing from other industries to come solve a problem, I'm positive that's occurred many times over in agriculture. And on the same token, I would like to think that agriculture has solved a number of problems for other industries at the same time. And especially when it becomes with the hot trendy problems like big data. Well, bottom line, yes, there's going to be a number of applications that move across the board. And going back again to my refinery example, if you don't know how to measure gases in a refinery setting or in a food processing section or in the healthcare section, then bottom line, I am probably dealing with one of those gases on my own farm in some ways. And livestock guys in particular, they deal in methane issues and methane buildup. And the issue of the large livestock operations where hogs are all in one building type bit. Yes, we need sensors in there for fire safety reasons. We don't need buildup and so on and so forth. So I look for solutions wherever they can come from. And at the end of the day, I'm also looking for ease of use and ease of transferring that across the boards. And then my Scottish side comes out. How much cheaper are you going to give it to me?
We definitely look across technology. We use platform outcome-driven innovation that we identify challenges and look anywhere they might be to find that. And in the digester side, we are making an energy product too. So definitely sensors from all sorts of industrial applications. We don't care where the tech comes from. It's actually, we really prefer to find mature tech in another application that when we bring it into our environment, we know a lot of what to expect about it. So, Sentry is one of those, comes from industrial wastewater treatment facilities first, and we're bringing it to ag and a lot of these different sensors.
Great, thank you all. A bit of a loaded question, but I think it's quite prescient. So how would you advise researchers in the audience on how to best engage with industry stakeholders to make sure their paths are aligned to solve the most urgent problems?
So I can give a first go on that, because I think, pulling yourself away from whatever the technology is that you're developing, but it's finding, if I look at our industry providing solutions to farmers, whether it be a seed variety or a new crop protection product or something else, I think those companies immediately work with the grower right off the bat to say, is this useful to you? Like, would you use this if I actually invented it? So I think finding those connections for who you would envision deploying your product. So for water monitoring, is it the Pest Management Regulatory Agency? Is it this Canadian Water Agency? Is it the registrant of a new product that would go to the Pest Management Regulatory Agency? And saying, like, I understand, I've seen from something that you have a data gap. This is the way I think you can solve it. Do you want this? I think that's an important question to ask early on, is to make sure that there's someone out there who sees a use for it. And now some people might not have the vision, and maybe you see a use for it that they don't see yet, but if you can't convince them of it, it might slow you down. So I think find some folks to be on your kind of strategic call list that can give you some insights as the target. Like if you're looking to create something that's going to help on farm, talk to someone like Don that's going to give you the straight goods about whether this has any use to them or not. Waiting until you're 15 years down the road may not be helpful. I'll give one example of, I was at a presentation and a really brilliant invention, and it was genetically modifying yeast so that it would produce vanillin. So instead of beer, it produces vanillin. It's super cool because vanilla is like incredibly expensive. It's like one of the most expensive things on the planet to create natural vanillin. And they were like, so this is going to be super cheap. It's going to do this, and again, it's all natural. And I'm like, wait, who's buying this? Like the food companies. Have you talked to them about what they think this is? Because their consumers might not have the same view as you. This is wonderful. It's sustainable. It's awesome. But I think your definition of what this is might differ from your end user's definition. You might want to work that out before you invest a whole lot of money into producing this space and knowing exactly where the market is for your product. Because it doesn't mean there wouldn't be a market, but it might not be the market you envision. So again, I think that's an important, get some of those people in your inner circle early, some of the potential users.
My slide, the impossible complexities of nature and markets, right? That all these things that seems like a great idea.
Well, it's one of my biggest, sorry, I was gonna say one of my biggest fears of agriculture stems from the same thing, which in the inverse, when the public demands something be sustainable, the process they demand sustainability by may not be sustainable, but the market might drive an unsustainable activity. So data is the way that we disprove that an ideology is actually sustainable. That's a big fear for agriculture, is that the market drives that someone has to do in the field when it's not actually helping. And we can only combat that with information, with data and explanations of actually what you want is this, not that.
Yeah. We're really looking to resource efficiency, stuff that's already being done, and finding ways that technology can help us use it more efficiently. Like Don said, you didn't buy your nitrogen to feed cattails, you bought it to feed your corn and your crops, right? And seeing, different ways you apply it. If you show someone, if you shoot your manure out through a cannon when it's this temperature, you lose that much. If you put it in this form instead, you can do that. Right. And Stephen asked a question about technologies bringing them from other industries. What we did is we found a company that's really, really good at integrating technologies into a platform. And we found some money, and we just shoot everybody over to them, and they figure out how to make all those that stuff, that information go into that single stack so that we can then use it. So, and Don, you're saying about other companies, this latest project, John Deere came on as a partner. Because one of the things we know around trust, we're asking farmers to participate in community scale facilities. We don't want anyone to think that they're getting shorted, that they're not getting fair value for what they're doing. So now with our program, because of John Deere, we're not telling them this is what you gave us. John Deere sends them a report, right? So we have that trust we can build on, and certainly they're a big global partner. And we've made John Deere pull their hair out tremendously. They loved our program until they realized that we break stuff intentionally to figure out how to not break it, and that made them very nervous. But anyways, it's certainly a dynamic field. And when I worked at XPRIZE, they sponsored a competition to design a competition for the future of food, and this was 3 years ago. We call it the In Future Project, which is informatics at the nexus of food, energy, water, and health. Because there's incredible advances in all of those fields. If we can find a way to bring all that information back, contextualize it, and then show people, right? Like this is the reality of the food that you're eating, then we can lead through education. And I think that's how we'll get past some of these things too. Don, if we can, like you said, if I can show you how to get another bushel, if I could save you 2% in the cost of your nitrogen, that's valuable, right? If we could show that we've reduced runoff by, some percentage, that's really valuable. Right. And we have to continually be bringing that value back to the stakeholders. And then that gives us the permission to keep going.
I want to congratulate you two guys on bringing up two very salient points. Christopher, the point you raised of bringing the value back is vitally important, because I'm considering myself, when I'm just looking at the farm operation, it's where I need innovation to come. I'm not interested in doing research. I have enough research being imposed on me by Mother Nature. I'm pretty sure she's running her trials on my farm. But seriously, and on another note, Chris, you had me mad for a second, because I'm an AGCO guy, not a John Deere guy. But I also know that John Deere is broke most of the time, so that made me feel happy. Ian, I want to thank you for raising the point of get your to the research crowd out there, get your head out of the lab, get your head out of the weeds, get your head back out of the area. Make sure you got a pub night, make sure you got to go to a hockey game, do something to take a break, because that's going to raise the moment where the eureka is going to happen, where you suddenly solve it and get good advice from good people. Because bottom line, in the farming industry, we're just a bunch of people, the same as anybody else. And there's 5 to 10% of us who are going to constantly run out and buy the newest, greatest, wonderfulest thing. And guess what? There's 6 wagon loads of crap that has to be sold at the auction sale, and 1 load of good stuff, because that's where the real tools are. But those are the 5% guys, because they used it for 2 years, put it on the shelf. 2 years, put it on the shelf. Please surround yourself with good people. And most importantly, find somebody to put in your circle who absolutely hates you if you can get there, because they're going to tell you straight out, this will never work. And that becomes motivation to continue on.
There's a consultant here named Matt Dixon, and we call him the dirt and the gold guys. No matter how good something is, he always finds everything that's wrong with it. And that's tremendously valuable.
Thank you for that, Don. I'm wondering at this time if there are any questions from the general audience. I see we have a number of participants. Oh, here one has come through. This is for Don. How do you find the 5% of the innovators that are willing to try new things?
Well, I'm going to turn that question back around on that. The reality is, do you really want to find those 5% of innovators? Because they could have only 1 foot on the farm and 1 foot past the mailbox, because they're about to get booted off and they're looking for anything to try and hang on. On a serious note, the reality is a farmer will try something for you, but it may have to be at the back of the farm, or it may not be on the area that you would want it on. Because first of all, I want to point out to you, the really good farmers that are out there are usually on the really good land. And that's the class 1, class 2 stuff. And by the way, we're getting low on class 1 in Canada because we're dumb enough to keep putting houses on it. And that's especially true here in Ontario. But how do you find the 5% that are real innovators? It's, again, look across farm organizations. We have the general farm organizations that collect farmers who want to be there and may have hair that's whiter than mine. That doesn't mean there aren't innovators there, but it's less likely you're going to find them. On the same token, we have other organizations that are just commodity specific. And if your problem isn't going to solve a problem for an Ontario grain farmer or the Alberta pulse grower or the Ontario greenhouse vegetable grower, the reality is your innovator can be across the various commodities that are grown. And a guy that is growing only 1 acre of greenhouse, he might be very, very new to the industry, but a more established greenhouse grower is going to be a lot more acres than that, as in maybe 25, 50, or 100. But remember, to build a greenhouse, and this data is very dated, it's $1 million an acre to put up a greenhouse. Then you still got to put the stuff in it. The most commodity-oriented crops are stuff like mine, corn, soybeans, and wheat. We get differentiation in identity preservation on soybeans because the U.S. doesn't want to do that. So that is what gives us a market. So there is no silver bullet here. I'm not going to give you a recipe for 5% of the innovators, because some guys are looking for a problem that's currently on their radar, and tomorrow it won't be. And it's the reality of it's more happenstance than going through the yellow pages and looking for the ad.
Yeah, I think I was gonna ask Don if he thought exactly that on, there's farm organizations, provincial and federal, all across the country that you can Google. But I think part of it's going to be beating the pavement a little bit, and it'd be the same if you were working in the commercial space. If you want to talk to a Walmart or a Sobeys, or if you want to talk to a local store owner, every minute they're not spending selling their product is a dollar lost. So finding the person who's willing to take their time to talk about a new idea might be hard, but it's still necessary. So I think you might have to contact 3 or 4 different 5 or 7 different grower organizations. And one will say, oh, I've got a guy out here that would be interested to talk about that. They're always interested in new stuff, but part of that is there'll be no easy just call one person and get a name. Like, that's going to be work where you're going to have to shop around and try to find someone who's interested to spend some time with you. Time is money, and no different on the farm than anywhere else. And just like in a grocery store, every inch of shelf space is a revenue generating portion of that store, and it's factored into the cost. Every square foot of a farm is the same. It's sometimes, I don't know if you feel that way, Don, people will sometimes look at a farm and go, oh, you got all this land, let's just try this over here on this quarter field. And you're like, every part of this is part of the system that makes sure that I get to farm again the next year. Can't just be giving up land all the time to try new things. So it's shopping around is going to be important.
Yeah, we look for people with a pain, that like, especially where someone else is putting some sort of pressure on them to do something, because then our solution just has to be better than their options, and that opens the door, because they have to do something, right? Because all of us, we're all busy. If we can avoid doing anything, we'll stick to the stuff we already got on our list. If someone else comes and say, you got to do this too, and we say, okay, we can offload that, we can take that pressure off, and they're far more receptive.
So thank you, everybody. We actually are at the point where we need to move to the next item on the agenda. We do have a question from Andrea. I'm wondering if she can ask it, if we can get a quick answer from the members of the panel before we move on.
I'm not sure if we can get a quick answer to this question, because it's a bit of a big question. So maybe it can be a lead into the follow-up conversations. But I think I just kind of wanted to build on what Don was just speaking to. I think we're circling around this idea of sort of an innovation sweet spot as the sector grows and the climate changes policy is constantly catching up to, I guess, effectively enable the innovation that is required to meet our needs. So then there's maybe this sweet spot where the innovation is solving problems that are unique or new enough that other people haven't yet been able to solve them, but also where regulation is just starting to develop to meet that, rather than existing or old regulation that doesn't currently meet our needs. So who should innovators speak to? What can they do to ensure that they're developing solutions that are impactful and transformative, and yet scalable within the existing regulatory environment? So how should solution seekers, creators, and enablers work with regulators to accelerate that change? As I said, that was a huge question and obviously not easy to answer. So whether that is best answered here or maybe in breakout rooms.
Yeah, I'll just really quickly say, I think we have a fairly small, intimate group here. So let's skip the breakout rooms. Let's stay together. And if you want to, jump in and answer Andrea's question.
I'll take a swing at it. It's a tricky question. I think I'll break it into two pieces. One, you're kind of saying, like, how do you know that you're doing something that matters, right? Like that's and how do you engage other people? So I think there's a regulatory side, then there's the agricultural side. I think one quick way to scan from the ag sector in general is look at those national commodity groups, Cereals Canada, the Canola Council, and then they'll publish often research plans where their research priorities are. So that'll kind of show you if their research priority is disease resistance in wheat, then their problem is they've got too much of a certain disease in wheat. Now they're approaching it from a disease resistance point of view, but maybe there's other ways to manage that disease in wheat that we're not thinking of. So you can kind of scan agricultural national groups or even provincial groups and look at what their research priorities are, and that'll give you a sense of what the big challenge is. Another, as Chris said, if the government has put out regulations restricting a certain action or putting the squeeze, if you will, on agriculture, they're going to be paying attention to that. I think a big one that just came out is on fertilizer and trying to reduce fertilizer emissions by 30%. There's not a whole lot of ways to do that other than applying less fertilizer. And that's a problem because what keeps our carbon intensity of agriculture low is high productivity per acre. So people are paying attention. What is our pathway to more efficient or effective fertilizer use that still lets us achieve the efficiencies we've gained while responding to these new requirements from the government? Or look at government consultations. Go to consultingcanadians.ca. Every consultation the entire government of Canada is running on every issue is there, from Heritage Canada to Sport Canada to water to food monitoring. You'll find the issues they're trying to create new regulatory policy for, and that can be another indication of where the challenges lie from a government point of view. It's kind of hard because otherwise it's hard to just call the government and get a meeting on what are your problems, because it's so big and so sprawling. But there's a couple places you could go to try to do an environmental scan of what your major issues are.
I thank Ian for his comments on look to the commodity groups and look for their strat plans and where their work is, because as an example, on my farm this fall, I had the unfortunate realization that I may have had black tar spot enter into a cornfield. That's a new disease to me. It's just on the horizon. Been in the US for a while. There isn't a solution yet. That's a big problem. Is there going to be one that we can find the technology for? I hope so. On the other point that Ian raised on the issue of reducing fertilizer emissions, I would like the bureaucrats to go back and give their damn head a shake, because guess what? Yes, I will reduce emissions every time I can, because I have to pay for that stuff. If they were giving it to me free, I'd be probably wasting it, but I have to pay for it. And the reality is, I can't build you protein unless there's a nitrogen and a carbon involved. And I got to make sure that nitrogen is right there when the plant wants it. And when the plant wants it, might be a time when I can't get in that field without doing serious damage to it, or the application, the changes, all the rest of it. So the question is quite broad and quite reaching. And the other area that I wanted to touch on is scalable. It might not be your place to be able to scale something. If you want to be Bill Gates, good frickin' luck. How many trillionaires do you know on planet Earth? How many billionaires do you know? Because some of them were able to scale a technology. The best you might be able to do is get bought out by somebody to add their innovation, your innovation, to their equipment and keep on moving it up and whatever else. So it's a reality of keep your, do not have blinders on except for your own personal aspirations on getting to where you're going to go. Because guess what? This is exactly like every first date anybody's ever had. You don't know what you're going to do, but you know you're going to like it if it goes well.
Thank you very much, Don. Chris, you were going to say, chime in there?
Yeah, just to say, Ian, reducing fertilizer can't be the only answer. We're working really hard to make fertilizer, harvesting it from existing solutions, right? Because Cornell did a study of the fertilizer plants, 100 times the methane emissions they claim that's getting exposed. But if we, like Don said, if we don't have that fertilizer, we don't have food. Right, so we're taking a couple of different approaches. So one is harvesting, another one is a local company example. Lucent has a technology that's got a biological demand aspect that you put it on the ground and it won't release that to the soil until the microbes in the plant zone say, I need some food. That's that kind of stuff. That's how we're going to win, have these breakthroughs, right? Because that could be much less expensive. New microbes being developed that fix nitrogen and others that release bound phosphorus. And, these are all the things we have to see. But again, that's where we need these data tools that we can put them in the soil, because Don needs to know, right? If I put something on that says it's time release, I need to know that it opens the box when my plant wants it, right? I can't take a chance, right? And he knows, you put your nitrogen fertilizer on it the way you've always done it, when it's going on. You hope that the timing works out, but it's so much you already know. It's super hard for anybody to step back from something that you've been intimate with and just hope it all turns out good, right?
And Chris, that's a point there that I want to put to the audience. The reality is we are awash in labeling in agriculture, because I can be regenerative farming, I can be organic farming, I can be a no-till farmer, because I used the label myself today. I can be a conventional farmer. I can be all definitions of a farmer, but labels don't tell you the real story, folks. And bottom line, my personal logic is I would never insult my land by growing organically. I'm not in a position where I will want to use my land without some technologies available to it to maximize the opportunities. Because I think more of my fellow man in feeding them than going organic. But organic is improving. And there are guys and gals who will maximize that window. So again, that goes back to that other question on if you think it, because for me, I use, and I don't like these words, synthetic fertilizers. To me, chemicals are all over the world, and chemistry shouldn't be a bad thing. It's being labeled that way in some cases. But I know that fertilizer is going to be available when I put it down or I put an inhibitor with it. I know it's going to be slow release. That's the kind of questions that I need answered before I will move ahead with a reality on nitrogen fertilizers as an example. Thank you.
Don, I want to say thank you very much for that comment. I also want to say thank you to Mr. Bush I've actually talked to Lucent Biosciences. That was a great description of what they do. I couldn't have done it better myself. I've heard them try. I don't think they do. Mr. Coughlin, thank you so much for moderating our panel and coming out here from Innovation Guelph. You're a much better place to do that than I am with your actual understanding of the space. So I really appreciate you being here today. I want to turn it over and flip it to the audience a little bit and give you a chance to say hi and share a little bit of what you're working on, what your interest is in the space. Ryan Gale.
Hi, everyone. I'm not into the large scale farming. I'm into the smaller urban farms. What our company is developing is a small robot for vertical hydroponics. But it's been great to listen to you, Don. The person who provides me space is a dairy farmer for the last 35 years, and we've had some great conversations. And this really brings to light what the issues are for me as well, just to listen to. And maybe I'll have a light at the end of the tunnel for you someday. If not.
Automation, yeah, labor is definitely a challenge in the space. I don't think we've talked about it much today, but certainly one of the issues out there. Amir, and Amir, I'll do us both a favor and I won't attempt your last name. Unless you slow down and mute yourself, and then I'll say Jahanlu. How did I do? If you're not interested in unmuting yourself, I will move on to Kevin. Kevin Cusson.
And I'm sorry to jump in here. I've just got a message. I have a family scheduling school pickup issue that has just arrived, and I may have to leave you just a few minutes early. My apologies, everyone. But this is the new world of school pickups, et cetera. And thank you again for the opportunity. My apologies for ducking out a little bit early.
No problem, Ian. And I don't know why they can't let 6-year-olds walk home,
I know.
more than 5 or 6 miles. I don't understand it. It's, they're like homing pigeons, right?
I grew up in a farm. Dad would just prop me up in the seat with a log and I could hit the gas pedal. I was allowed to drive through the field. You can't do that anymore either.
All right, Ian, thank you so much for being here today. Absolutely go take care of some of the most important things there.
Thanks.
Mr. David Hobson, are you there? Or listening in?
Yes,
No
I
question.
am.
It's just, yeah. What's your interest in the space?
Well, I do tech transfer at the University of Guelph, and I also do industry liaison, and we're looking to solve problems that are relevant to the real world as opposed to just what academics like to explore to create novel new knowledge. Knowledge is not terribly useful unless it's put into practice. So Don has made that point many times.
Absolutely, and it is a challenging job putting into practice and hitting those levels of trust that people are used to seeing, right? And,
yeah. Often one of the biggest problems we have is that the problems that industry wants solved are not easily fundable by the universities because they're not within the existing grant structure for us to get started with the basic and applied research. If it's already proof of concept, proof of relevancy, well-developed technology, well, then industry should fund that, and because they should be the stakeholder that takes it over and uses it and benefits from it. But a lot of our technologies are too early. And so it's good, it's useful knowledge, but it's still way too early and too risky for industry to invest. So we need to understand what your needs are so that we can then push it a little bit further up the technology readiness level, and then we can actually then work with industry to customize it to the real need. But that initial work has to be done just to understand the fundamental potential of any new technology. I have no influence at all on the cost of change.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I saw Amir, you joined under a different name there for a second. I was wondering if you did want to say hello or were able to unmute yourself. All right. Shannon, UBC has got quite a bit of work in the ag space with your
Land and food systems.
Yeah, with land and food systems working out there. How much of what is that sort of supposed to be bridging the gap? I mean, David has sort of brought up that a lot of the research is quite early stage and industry really needs things that, to Don's point, meet a high bar of trust. Is that what the land and food systems is trying to demonstrate? I mean, you've got something called the UBC Farm. Is that where
That's
you're
right.
actually doing that translation of technology to commercializable products?
Well, I think the research translation part is really tricky. I mean, David has described what some of the major problems are. Is that there's some very strict requirements around what constitutes research funding. As you move towards more applied funding, the amount that's available is quite a bit lower. And in that window where you go to translation, the money dries up. Like the pure actual translation, literally, the money dries up until you're eligible for NRC IRAP, which means you've had to have incorporated. So you could have a 2-year window where you're bootstrapping your new innovation to move it forward, haven't got it to the stage that you've got a customer that someone's willing, that you were actually eligible for IRAP, and then that would only really cover your salary costs. And so it's very, very challenging. And especially we have conversations with some of the postdocs and graduate students that are spinning out companies. And a lot of them come from countries in which they have a rural background and they have an agricultural background, and that's what they want to see innovation in. But you can imagine that's really challenging if you're sending part of your graduate stipend back home as a remittance. You don't have a lot of extra money to support yourself. So there is a huge equity issue in who can fund their entrepreneurial journey to actually have your innovation come to fruition. And that's an area that we're actively working with the province to see if we can try to correct, because that's sort of, as you pointed out, Stephen, earlier, that's some of the lowest hanging fruit. Is there's a lot of innovations that are falling off the table. We're not getting the research translated, and some of it is the systemic inequity issues. And I'll stop there.
I'll say we've got about $1.5 million in projects going with UBC right now. The brilliant team, Dr. Stephen Hallam in life sciences. And I said this to Shannon, we're working with Life Science Clean Energy Research Center. We have very little traction with land and foods. Right.
You mentioned that, Chris. That's right.
Yeah, but we've had great success. We have a not-for-profit organization, but we find industry partners and bring them together with academics and do the research. So, if we can do a lot of that writing, then we call people certified smart people, right?
Yep.
The PhDs and all that. If we can find the funds, the researchers shouldn't be out fundraising. We should leave that to the fundraisers, right? They shouldn't necessarily be picking the problems to solve. The market that is creating that pull that's calling, please solve this for me, right? And so we're building challenges like that. But we see, one of the most important things is build a safe space where these things can be developed that does generate the revenue. Like we have a proposal in play to create what's called the Symbiosis Center that will be a full-scale applied research facility that all these things can be done. Because said you can't ask a farmer, hey, can you spot me a couple acres to try something this year? Their margins on a lot of this stuff is so small.
Yeah.
We have to protect everyone from risk that we possibly can, and we can't wait around for the policies and everybody else to line up for it. So there needs to be an engine in there that can do that matchmaking. And Foresight has some great power that can connect the dots. The Core Clean Tech program, where they're getting organized around ideas. We want to be that economic engine, right? We're set to dedicate 20 years of revenue from our biogas contract to ongoing research and development, because anybody that's in the research space, $5 million a year, it's a lot of money, and it's not, right? But if as an NGO that can get leveraged 3, 4, 5 times, right, then you can really do something. We just gave Dr. Hallam $40,000 for a MyTech scholarship that's getting turned into $160,000 and I think 3 or 4 jobs. Right, the beautiful power in that, and that's again why these partnerships is so important. And kudos to Foresight and UBC for bringing this group together.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I want to pick up on a couple of themes. So one of the ones you touched on there is the ability to leverage grant funding, and there's certain requirements around that. One of which you need to get industry dollars. So that's often a big hiccup for teams to be able to access, is to find cash from somewhere that actually qualifies to match with these applied research funds. And MyTax is the one that will most generously fund stipends for students with a tiny amount for their actual research expenses. One of the other challenges is, Chris, you brought up the fact that you've created this network, but you haven't managed to penetrate all the different silos across the university. So I was formerly a university professor, so I can talk with that hat on of what it was like to be within academia. And there may be some people also from academia on the call. One of the challenges is that when the public looks at a university, they think of it as an institution, like you would have a corporate or a government institution in which there's project managers, there's a social structure, there's a hierarchy. I see David nod. And what the public doesn't understand is when they say, oh, there's been a UBC study or University of Guelph study. No, there wasn't. The university doesn't do studies in general. That's a generalization. What it is you've got a building in which there's been an allocation of a tiny amount of space that everyone scrabbles and fights over, and salary associated with one professor, who then spends 80% of their time fundraising to pay for sometimes additional rental space, look after their animals, buy their reagents, get their equipment, pay for all of their students, and only spends a small amount of time actually being able to conduct the research through the work of their graduate students and their postdocs or undergrads. So they're actually working as independent businesses, essentially as entrepreneurs within the university itself. And in some cases, the system actually discriminates if you are collaborative, because then you're sharing your credit across various groups, and that makes you potentially less competitive for some of the rewards in academia. So unfortunately, this very, very old, over 1,000-year-old institution has these systemic challenges within it that we're trying to work through, and it's not just in Canada. This is throughout the world. We have these kind of problems. So so Chris, your approach of creating relationships sort of one at a time and pulling people in and bringing them in, is the right approach. That's the best way to do it. And then occasionally, once in a while, there will be an institute that gets formed that perhaps might have a Superfund grant or a special Center of Excellence grant, and maybe there's a little bit of discretionary funding there, but that's very unusual. So it's more that each one is associated with an individual professor in most cases. But the amazing thing is, because we have these applied research grants, if industry is willing to put the cash on the table, that opens up access for professors to collaborate with you for research funding that is much easier to get. A success rate of closer to 75 to 100%, where the normal grants would be 5 to 20% success rate. So there would be huge appeal for academics to work in collaboration with industry around that.
But the challenge put forward by David is that a lot of times the academics are working at a stage where industry is not willing to put up the money, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's the interest. So how do you get the granting agencies to recognize that it's addressing industry problem, or that industry is interested in seeing that problem solved without actually putting money up, right? Because to Don's point, if it doesn't help him grow another bushel and sell another bushel, he's not putting a dollar into it. But Don, you're here today. You're obviously interested in academia, looking down the road and solving your problems. Yeah. Is that something that has ever worked anywhere?
Well, I would posit that there's 2 historic research institutes that are now lacking in Canada that we had historically in North America and in Europe, but they started to peter out post-war. So they're very, very strong in the 50s to the 70s, and then they petered out. So they were corporate R&D, like Bell Labs and some of the other famous labs, where you had like half a dozen Nobel Prize winners coming out of those labs because the institutions had enough corporate money and support for R&D that they were willing to do long-term investment in this sort of discovery and applied work. And they managed to get revenue out of that. Well, when cost cutting started coming with the recession in the 80s, they just started getting rid of these in-house R&D firms. So, pulp mills used to have them, mining, lots of companies have shed this, and now they have consultants. The other category is we used to have a much higher level of government research that was available. We had a Canadian Fisheries Board. We, through the Harper era and even before that, since 1990, they've been gutting the technical infrastructure for expertise within Canadian research within government, and we've lost huge institutional knowledge through that. And it's only more recently that there's been a few hires, but it's very hard to pick that up again. And so those are some of the gaps. Those are some of the problems that we're facing, and part of it comes back to just where we have our values within society and who's made decisions to support that or not. That doesn't provide a solution for you, Stephen, but that's some of the reasons for where we are. And maybe David, maybe you have a solution.
There's lots of solutions. They all need to be customized to the situation. We are not the US, we are Canada. We have different parameters. Our spending level on business investment and research and development is pitifully poor. And in the United States, it's much higher. Well, it's a different market, it's a different space. And the United States is making the businesses are making proper business decisions. They're concentrating their resources in areas where they have the biggest impact, which is in the United States. So Canada's industry is pitifully reluctant to spend money on R&D. It's risk capital that they won't put out. This is demonstrated by SHRED, and everybody says, give them more SHRED credits. The SHRED only helps the people that are actually trying to do some R&D. It doesn't help other people that are not doing the R&D. So industry in Canada generally wants a free ride. That needs a national innovation policy that has to change that culture in business. Business needs to lobby the government to do things that help business survive in Canada. Otherwise, it's a global game. They're not going to stay here. The small ones will stay here because they don't want to move out of the neighborhood, but the big ones can go anywhere they want, and their money can go anywhere they want. So, the SBIR program in the United States is tremendously successful, different parameters. Don't try and make a DARPA in Canada. That's a bad move. We're not the United States. We don't have the US military as a buyer. That's just not going to happen. The government starts throwing money at moonshots. It's basically wasted money in my point of view. We need to focus on real solutions that are applied every day, bread and butter solutions that have incremental impact. We're not going to create another BlackBerry just because we did it once. You know, I mean, that technology changed the world, but it wasn't exactly something that the government or our ecosystem at universities created. So Canada's a unique beast living beside the elephant. But one thing we don't have is a national innovation policy, a national research funding policy. We fund all the universities. I got to be careful here so I don't get fired, but we fund all the universities largely as an economic tool to keep all those trained people here and continuing to work. But the reality is their output may not be working at the real agenda that most of the taxpayers want, which is, you know, technology, innovation, high standard of living, secure jobs, repeatable, slow growth in companies and economic standards. You know, we think producing research is a great idea. Well, research is just a tool to provide stability. But you know, we do have a research brain drain, and sometimes it comes back, sometimes it comes out. Goes out, sometimes it comes back in. But we do have a real problem with the gap between research and application in the real world. And lots of countries have tried to solve that. Israel has a solution, which is where they take charge of technologies, put real resources on it. They limit who can control it, and they only focus on the best, and they tend to have a pretty good track record. And there's lots of documented evidence on that. Canada's not homogeneous, and we don't have a national strategy at our universities. So we need our universities to cooperate so that we actually join resources, because we're a small country. So that, you know, Saskatchewan, University of Guelph, UBC, and McGill, the main ag schools, should all be working together on big projects for wicked problems, as opposed to, I'm a professor, I'm going to work on my one problem. I don't even work with the guy down the hall or the other college on my campus. Academics are notoriously bad at siloing themselves into their own grant. That's not appropriate. But you can't change that until you change the rules, which means you need to get researchers to play together, which means you need to get universities to play together, which means you need the government to say, okay, we'll fund your universities, but we want to see a high level of cooperation, collaboration, and focusing on this. I have 800 faculty, which means I have 800 sole proprietary entrepreneurs all looking to get money for themselves, and they don't care what the output is because they just want to survive themselves. That is not a innovation strategy that helps industry. That helps create new knowledge, which, if the knowledge isn't being used, you could say is maybe not the best way for us to have a research agenda for a country.
I like the way you couched that last one. Maybe not a good one. I think you'll, if anybody does see this recording, your job will be safe for another day at least. I appreciate your comments, though, your honesty and your participation. I want to say thank you to everybody here today. Christopher Coughlin, Christopher Bush, Don McCabe, Shannon Barr, and Dave for jumping in there at the end. Again, we've got another of these sessions on the biocircular economy. If anybody is interested, or you know of any folks who might be doing research in that space, we'll have some great speakers coming back here in a couple weeks' time on December 8th before we take a little break for the Christmas season. And we're back later in January with a session on water technologies. We'll shoot out a copy of this recording after the event, and we will, I think there was a little checkbox there you could say if you want to find out about future events. But if you do want to, you can always sign up on the Foresight website, foresightcac.com, and there may be even something on the UBC website, but it's a big one. It's tough to navigate, Shannon. I got to tell you, that's not the most friendly website to find things on. With that, I will say thank you so much. We are at time. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to magnificent innovation in the ag space and wonderful stories out of this group and the industry at large.